Like to call the policy committee meeting to order. It is Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021, and it's 6:02 p.m. I am Roberto Rodriguez. I'm the chair of the committee. I want to just, before I go through the agenda and get us started, if we can do a really quick introduction round. Like I said, my name is Roberto Rodriguez, at-large member of the school board and chair of the policy committee. I'll pass it on to student rep Emily. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Chung, and I'm a junior at Deering High School. I'm the student representative for Deering. I will pass it to Aura.
Hi, everybody. I'm Aura Russell-Vetter, and I'm the District 4 school board member. Oh, sorry. How about you, Anne?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Rothaker. I'm the executive assistant to the superintendent and here in my capacity as policy committee secretary. I'll send it to Jeff.
Hi, Jeff Iris, represent District 5. I'll pass it on to Aaron.
Good evening, everybody. Aaron Townsend, assistant superintendent of school management and staff for the policy committee. And then Emily Figdor, Emily F.
Good evening, all. It's Emily Figdor. I'm the District 2 representative on the school board and the school board chair. And I'm going to be in and out a little bit tonight. I apologize for that, but I'll participate to the greatest extent possible.
Great. Thank you, Chair Figdor. And off screen, we have administrator from our remote academy, Jake Giesman, and he'll be joining us later on in our meeting for a second part of our agenda. So first thing on our agenda today is to approve the minutes of the January 26th meeting. Do we have a motion? So Irish, second. My name is Russell Vetter. Any questions on the minutes? Nope. Is there any public comment on the meetings? I noticed also, by the way, that board member Yusuf is on the list of participants. I don't know if he's interested in being promoted or if he was just going to sit by. Seeing no hands raised from the public, any board discussion on the minutes? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes of January 26, 2021, please indicate, and that's unanimous with the students voting along with the majority, with the student voting along with the majority. Great. Next on the agenda, I'll just kind of briefly talk about what we're going to discuss, and then I'll hand it over to Aaron Townsend. So first, we're going to debrief the school safety community dialogue. We have some notes and takeaways from that discussion. So we'll just share that with us, and we'll have a conversation around that and how we move forward with it. Then we'll continue our discipline policy review. And that's what Jake Giesman is here to help us with. As you remember, he's the one that's been championing this work all along. And then I don't have anything else to add, but if any of the board members present or student rep present have any other issues or points to bring up, we probably will have a few extra minutes at the end. I'm saying that very cavalierly. So having said that, I'll hand it off to Assistant Superintendent Townsend to start with our debrief of the school safety dialogue. Aaron, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Roberto. So yeah, I was thinking just from like a time allocation standpoint that we would probably want to spend like 45 minutes to an hour potentially on this, maybe 45 minutes to leave the other half of the meeting for the discipline policies. I think, I know I'll probably regret saying this, but I think we'll move a little bit quicker on those discipline policies on this round, but we shall see. So within that, my hope, I think, for today is to, just kind of debrief the meeting, right? Just a little bit big picture, right? Kind of takeaways. Then use the opportunity to look at, and I know I just sent it, so I'm thinking maybe what might be useful is for us to take a few minutes to just kind of like give people, I was thinking 10 minutes to kind of sit with and skim and review the, the documents that I shared attached earlier today. We just got, kind of from last week's engagement to then just kind of inform our debrief with the aspiration of identifying, you know, what are our next steps. And I think there's kind of two buckets of next steps. One, just specifically around the policies. Are we seeing kind of a direction around revisions to the school policy so that we can initiate some revising actually of those to be able to bring back to this committee for further discussion? And then is there anything else that's kind of coming up in terms of potential next steps out of this work based on the initial conversation we had? So I propose we take about 10 minutes, because I know those things came in late and people were in the middle of their days, to at least do an initial scan of that. And I think it'd probably be useful if folks in between this meeting and next meeting spent more time with it to just make sure we've kind of taken as much from that as we can. So does that make sense in terms of process for folks? That we just kind of take 10 minutes here to access. And so the two documents I know under this one in the agenda, and I can put these, I'll put these actually in the chat and see that we have a couple of folks. I'll try and chat these to everybody. You know, so there's two documents in there, in addition to just like all the policies, as I've just continued to kind of keep putting those in there. So one is, this first one is the summary of the small group notes. So that's kind of like the content, if you will. And it starts with a bit of a summary around it, the main summary, and then goes into just, you know, not quite the raw notes, but a cleaned up version of notes from all the different small groups. So that's really kind of the meat of it. Then the other document is from the feedback survey. And it again has kind of like a summary of it and then the raw data from it. So that's the second document I'm pasting in. So hopefully everybody can see those both here and the attendees. So if people are good with that, I'd say let's take 10 minutes to just kind of let people sit with those, kind of skim it. I'd invite people to spend potentially more time, well, anyway, with the summary from the small groups. That's where the content is, but let's take 10 minutes on a start.
All right, good. I think that's all right. Thank you.
Hey, Aaron, I have a question, just real quick. Were these attachments sent to, or will they be sent to all those that participated in that meeting, or are we just all right?
Yeah, I'll send it. Yeah, yes. And was thinking I would do that after tonight's meeting as well, just if there was anything kind of coming out of today's conversation to add to that follow-up email. So I didn't have time to push it when I got it.
No, I appreciate it.
But also thought it would make sense to do after tonight's meeting.
Thank you.
All right, I totally know that's not enough time to read like 30 plus pages of documentation from the meeting. But hopefully to just initially get grounded in a sense of kind of the feedback and the direction on things. So maybe let's just do a whip around real quick of what were a couple of either words, phrases, or something that just kind of stood out just to kind of get the conversation rolling from what you saw there. So just popcorn out.
I can go. I jotted down a few things. I really was drawn to, I just noticed a few of the comments about just what is the meaning of safety. And then that was interesting, just that was coming up, like safety could be connection to staff. Like, you know, like safety doesn't necessarily mean the absence of something, you know, dangerous happening, but that's feeling safe could be, you know, something to explore more. What does that mean? And I kept seeing relational, like the part I was just reading before we stopped. Like I saw that a few times, and that kind of stuck out to me that that our schools, just people's observation that schools really must be relational to create positive relationships for students to feel safe and learn. and then a couple other, just the staff needing the skills to de-escalate and clear protocols like that. I saw that a couple times. That seemed like a clear, like this is what we're missing, and this is what we're needing is the clear skills and protocols. And then I guess just lastly, trust and transparency were a couple of the other kind of words that stuck out for me.
Great. And let's just try and go quick so then we can just kind of spin it up. Yeah.
I'm going to echo Aura's word with respect to most of what she said, but the one thing that stuck out to me was trust and transparency.
Emily, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I had 3 sentences that I took from it, and I'll try to just go through it a little bit faster. But for everyone to feel safe, we all need to be empowered to take care of each other. And then students should be given full transparency on these policies so they know their rights within the school. And advocates to make kids who are navigating the judicial system or dealing with any repercussions still feel welcome and feel like they belong in the community.
Great. Thank you. Yusuf, since you're here, I'll offer it, but I won't. I don't feel like you're like you have to. Nope. Want to pass? All right.
Oh yeah, that was smooth. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's my first time. I'm so excited to be here tonight. I would say that many participants also brought up the community concerns. What would be the relationship with the law enforcement look like with overall community? And I think that's very important is part of the community leaders and how they addressing issues that law enforcement respond to the school. So that caught me up, and I think that's a good important thing to bring up.
Thank you. Jake, did you want to chime in, or you're?
Sure, why not? I did jot down 3 pairs of ideas that could be in opposition or could complement each other. One was uniformed versus non-uniformed law enforcement. One was the idea of having open versus structured relationships with law enforcement. And another one was safety versus comfort.
Thank you. Yeah, so I, looking through it, I think very much like it was intended. This is a good kind of survey of how people feel about safety in our schools. And there were a lot of common themes. As with, as decision makers, I think that surveys are just one indicator that we use to drive our decisions. And as Emily said, even within those that are taking the survey, we want to try to have them be as well informed as possible. So there's a responsibility both in how we inform the public that we ask to give us their input, and also how much do we weigh their input with other less, less volatile indicators, like, for example, outcomes, things that are measurable. Like I'm going to reference what we're going to discuss later on today, our discipline policy. That did not get started because we did a survey about kids not feeling safe. That got started because our outcomes indicated inequities that showed a disproportionate representation of Black and brown students and special education students in our out-of-school suspensions. And so it was the outcomes that kicked off the work. Had we done a survey of how people feel in the school about discipline at that time, we likely would have gotten a really positive response. Why? Because the kids that are negatively affected are out of school suspended and not included in the survey. So who are we included in the survey, and how informed are they? So again, indicators that do weigh in into our decisions, but ultimately we need to measure it with our outcomes, because that's how we're going to be held accountable.
Well, let's, I want to just to, I guess, like in terms of furthering this debrief and kind of taking us further a little bit, kind of the three questions are like, one, just want to open up space for a minute about just any feedback, like generally, right? How do people feel like it went last week, right? So just to take a few moments on that, just to acknowledge, kind of what your experiences were and what you saw. Then second, most importantly, to the charge of this group, what does this feel like it tells us or informs us about next steps with the policy revisions? And then third is just, are there any other next steps that, this initial conversation might suggest? So let's start with just that first one of, just any quick takes, folks, to offer some space for feedback here about how they felt like the event went last week. And I guess in any way, just to give you some space to kind of reflect on it, given that we worked for a few months to set it up and make it happen. So, and again, the twin goals were just to if this helps in the reflections, were one, that notion of creating space for dialogue as a means to building some trust and doing some restoration. And then the second was getting guidance or insight from the community dialogue to apply to the policy revisions. So maybe it's helpful to think about the reflections in the context of those two goals.
I think
I'll get. Oh, I'm sorry, Emily. Go ahead.
Oh no, Mr. Roberto, you can go first.
I'll be really brief. I thought it was great. I thought you can tell that there was a lot of effort put into the organization of it. As it was noted in the documents, it felt like we needed more. So this, to me, feels like a good starting point to create these opportunities. Many of the people that were there, this issue of law enforcement and the SROs is probably the first time in a long time that they've been engaged in the work of the school board and leadership. So when we talk about building trust, it's not just building trust within that issue, but in the greater scope of our work, right? Like they have to get buy-in into the entirety of what we're doing. So having more opportunities like this in different issues, as we move forward with policy work and any other discussion, we're about to talk about starting times, all sort of really engaging issues. This model, I think, serves a purpose, as I said before, an indicator that we use to weigh in into our decisions.
One feedback that I have for the meeting was I wish we did get more BIPOC student voices in. And I did try to contact some members of the Black Student Union at both Deering and Portland, but I just personally don't have that much manpower to be contacting hundreds of people. So I wish that we could have put more pressure on that.
Yep.
I guess I'll just add to both thoughts I had after Roberto and Emily shared. I agree that forum, I think something similar, maybe just to continue to have opportunities. I mean, I've had so many community members share maybe more in that they want to be able to have questions answered, but I think just the back and forth and having a relationship, right, in our communities, because our board meetings just don't allow for that, right? I mean, we're presenting and we're, we just listen and we don't get to have any back and forth. So I'll just share that it was an interesting role to be in a small group because I kind of felt like I wanted to listen and that was our role, but it was interesting. I mean, I did have a little bit of sharing, but I think it helped me see that yes, and benefit in building relationships and trust that just this forum may really have, may be useful for us having other conversations. So that felt like a benefit to me. And then what was I going to say? Oh, maybe with what Emily shared, then it just makes me think more about what are the ways to engage with communities that are not, coming to our school board meetings, that when just knowing that the forums that we have are really a very small piece of our community that show up. So, maybe this helps us just think, oh, okay, would this kind of event, and Emily did try to do some outreach, what are ways that we can get feedback about what kind of events might be useful to get more dialogue about issues, but helpful to have, done this, right, and see what we got from it. And I think just the one other thing that I was just aware of for the meeting was that there were kind of the two, you know, talking about safety, and then there was also the piece about the SRO, right? Like we were clearly not having this to go through what happened, right? That wasn't the purpose of it, but that was still a part of what it was for a lot of people, right? So it was hard to kind of not, like, that would be coming up. And so I think that's some of the piece about process and trust. There are those issues going on, which are real, right? But also, it just seemed like there were the two different, you know, talking about safety and what does that mean, and also like what happened in this situation that people have feelings about. So I guess that just felt like, I guess my reflection is just that was sort of a two different, maybe conflicting things going on there. But I think that there was meaning for people to be able to share about both of those. So that's mine.
Am I allowed to just say ditto to everything that was just said?
Yes.
If I could articulate what was on my mind, it would be a combination of everything that was just said, to include Emily. I remember the SRO issue, and it was very contentious, particularly in the social media atmosphere. What I found about this meeting, despite the topic, was that those who were engaged left the meeting providing me with the same feedback that was a really great meeting, because you do have it was a really civil discourse about, okay, this is how I feel, this is why I feel this way, and then you hear the other side, and it was very cordial, very professional, and I think very productive. So to the extent we can use that model, I don't know how we would adopt it in future kind of big issue topics, but those who had genuine concerns felt heard. And I think the briefing that we just received from Adam earlier kind of reflects that. So I think those who participated would welcome the opportunity to read that, because I think it's an accurate reflection.
Thank you for sharing that, Jeff, because I when you said that, I thought, oh, in my group, there were some very strongly opposing positions. And I do feel like what I hope we're modeling as, you know, us as leaders and, you know, as board members and our admin team, is that we can talk about tough things, right? And that being uncomfortable and being together, like, that has value. And I did see that people were hearing each other's perspectives and, like, even maybe pushing each other a little bit to, you know, just think outside of their own frame of things. So that reminded me that I was observing that, and that felt really powerful. And I do think we don't have enough opportunities to do that, right? Sit with people in, like, a context that feels like it's a safe kind of a box, you know, a safe container to have somebody facilitate, and, like, just be really, like, open to whatever you're sharing is okay, as long as, you know, we're being respectful and listening. So I will say that felt really meaningful to me too, and I think people felt that.
I don't know, Jake, if you want to say anything from your perspective, having participated, anything to add. And Yusuf, you didn't join us, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Aaron, can I just add really quickly? You know, another thing that has come up, and we heard it as recently as last night, is that, you know, folks in the community, they want to know why, you know, when we take a vote, when we take a position, they want to know why, right? So, because they understand where we stand, because our votes reflect that. But when we have an opportunity to explain ourselves, even if they disagree, at least, like, just like Jeff said, like, now at least I know why we disagree, and that alone, you know, gets us so many places. So that is valuable. That you guys, sometimes you think I talk too much. I'm just trying to let people know where I'm at, you know.
Again, business meetings and board meetings, they're not, you know, anyway, there's just this ongoing tension, right? So what do we think that means? What's coming up for you all about specifically the charge for the work that, you know, we have in front of us about approaching this, you know, set of 9+ policies, right? Given the dialogue and the direction there, what do we think makes sense in terms of next steps with the policies? Does anybody have any? I mean, yeah, let me just pause for a minute, see if folks have thoughts.
That's tricky. I think those who participated need a little bit of time to digest the recommendations or the outcome, what was provided today. And I don't know, this is kind of, I don't want to say it's uncharted or unprecedented. It may very well be, but to the extent that kind of mediation that worked on that topic swayed some people, others not, I think is yet to be seen. So I think, do we revisit having another community engagement with those folks who are involved after they have an opportunity to digest the breakdown of what happened? I'd be open to thoughts on that, but I'm not sure how it directly correlates how we change our policies at this point. I think it's a little premature.
Other reactions, yeah.
The survey, we surveyed everyone immediately as they were leaving, right? Is there a way to do like a kind of like, hey, it's been a week. This has kind of been simmering for a week. You know, how would you answer this survey now? Because when you answered it with the emotion and then compare it, you know, maybe there's a big shift. Like a week later, I felt like it was a waste of time. But the moment I was there, I thought it was helpful. Maybe that's one way to measure it.
Well, I'll say we did. Yeah, it was available at the close, and the following day we sent out the link again. So it wasn't just in the immediate aftermath and so forth. But you know, I think of the feedback survey. Sorry, I'm trying to get to the right doc. The survey only had 29 respondents of like the feedback survey. And that was, we had 70 to 80 people present. So the feedback survey, reflects just a quarter to a third of the folks that participated. But the small group notes are inclusive of the whole thing, right? In terms of that doc. So.
To Roberto's point, if I might just add for a second, I was one of the participants who was over here, and there was someone in our group that was over here, and we had a very civil discourse. And tonight, I feel the same way I did when I left that meeting. That hasn't changed. So, not that that's an indicator. Maybe parents have other things to think about, or those who participated have just kind of, dismissed it or just moved on with their train of thought. But as we reapproach the subject, and if we re-engage them with the survey, then perhaps that would be a better indication.
I mean, I guess I wonder some about not having moved the ball, so wondering is if between now and our next meeting, you guys obviously have more than 10 minutes to digest, some of that, because I think there was in some of the small groups, there starts to play out some language about the policies and what people think should be true in some of those. And so I guess I would wonder, a wondering I have is, do we want to start kind of like digging into some of those based on that? Because I would wonder about getting people back together without having moved something forward for them to come back and start to have reaction to like, so it feels like something would need to happen before another re-engagement. So I would wonder if we want to, kind of like, have everybody commit to, kind of taking stock of what was in the content from this first one, and then be prepared to kind of do, not necessarily like our line by line wordsmithing read, right? But to like talk about each of the policies next time and say, based on what we saw in this, I think that's, potentially what we suggest around how this policy may evolve initially, and then we're planning some opportunity for additional feedback or engagement with folks. I think the student question I want to address as well, but Emily, I see you with the hand up.
Yeah, and sorry again to be in and out a little bit, but I actually saw quite a lot, like from the information we got back, I saw some real strong through lines in terms of clarity of roles. and also, cultivating an ongoing relationship. So I think I was really happy to see those two pieces come out. So, and again, I'm sorry if I've missed part of the conversation here, but just reflecting on that as that to me gives some sense of like of a path, a path forward.
Yeah, I felt like there was some, potentially not necessarily universal, which is why I think it would be good to have another round of feedback loop, but there were some patterns in there for us to mine with, given some more time to digest the material. Laura, did you want to say something? Or?
Yeah, this is another topic altogether, but it felt like the participants and, I felt like the focus was more high school level. Am I accurate in that? Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm just having in my mind like discipline policy is going to be for, right, across our district, right? So
yes. And I would say it was, we didn't collect that data, but it certainly wasn't exclusively high school. I know we had a handful of elementary school folks and middle school. So I would probably lean high school in large part because of the SRO and particularly staff internally, but I think the parent representation was a bit broader than.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I just was thinking that because, in having engagement, I thought, well, of course, some of the things were, the SRO role, of course, and I don't know all the data about discipline, across the age, but I would imagine a lot at high school level, right? But just to be thinking maybe about how do we be sure that there's engagement throughout the, the different grade levels. And then I just feel like having a really robust student, like opportunity for student roles in this, because I do feel like the student engagement could be more. And I know, Emily, I don't feel like having Emily be responsible for that is, you explained what you did, Emily, but just for us to really be conscious about how are there student roles that really do have teeth, I think that's really important. So I don't know whether that's, I'm just throwing this out here, but a task force or, something that's really thought out, like as the process goes forward. I guess that feels important to me. And then just thinking about staff, discipline policy is going to affect all staff, but I definitely felt like in this discussion, there's certainly staff that really, had really specific experiences one way or the other with the SRO and concerns about like what a teachers need for training. And so I guess just being thoughtful about, maybe the different perspectives throughout staff that have these experiences with how discipline has worked or not worked and how they've experienced safety in our schools. So that's just some rambling, but those were my few thoughts.
Emily, I want to hear your thought, and then maybe I can put a proposal on the table.
Depending on.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Two Emily's. Go ahead, Emily John.
Sorry, Miss Victor. This is why I call it Miss Victor, because it gets confusing for me. But I was hoping, Mr. Townsend, since it seems like you had some thoughts when Aura was talking about like a student task force, it would probably make more sense for you to go first. And then I might have some thoughts after that.
Okay, yeah. Just on the student front, I think that's absolutely like a next step. The timing of it, 6 p.m. at night, and I think there are a lot of things that made it challenging for student access. So I think one thing that we could work on that I feel is a must is having a student dialogue, just a separate student dialogue about this, using some of the same infrastructure of questions and prompts. To potentially some breakouts in similar ways. So I think that's something we could commit to doing prior to the next policy committee meeting, sometime later in March before we get back together, just so we have gotten some of that input before we're even talking about any of the policies, just as a starting point to just bring that forward to kind of be on par with what we heard from this mix of adults. So that was what I was going to say.
I think that having a student dialogue would be very important in this realm of work. And also, I do like what Aura said about having a student task force, like a group of students from all three of the high schools, just working on these policies and giving like consistent feedback on them, whether that would be during the policy committee meetings or something outside of that. I think the difficulty it comes with like reaching students by like the mass population, I guess, is like contacting through email, which is basically our only option. And then no one really checks their emails. And then when it comes to, I mean, I'm just trying to get a group of like 15 students to come to this DHS rep group. It's terrible. It's like some people I'm Snapchatting them, some people I'm texting them through Instagram. I'm like emailing some of them, texting some of them, falling back like every so often to make sure they can still come. And it's a total mess. And I feel bad for anyone who has to eventually put that group together, but I do think it's important. Yeah.
Can I just follow up on that, Emily? Just a quick question. Do you think, based on what you just said, is that a timing issue for students? Like the data time, the time during the day in which we generally address these things, like at 6:45?
Timing.
Is that would it be beneficial if we tried to schedule that kind of engagement, I don't know, either during school or perhaps directly after school? Do you think there'd be more involvement?
Yeah, that's the interesting point, is like, I'm assuming the students we're trying to engage are like a representative group of students, but particularly emphasizing on like BIPOC students. I think from the majority of like BIPOC students that I know, a common theme is that they all work outside of school. So that makes it very difficult to find like meeting times. And I think that's the biggest barrier. Like, we're trying to increase equity by reaching out to these like marginalized communities, but then we have to acknowledge the certain like fallbacks or that these communities have, and that makes it difficult for them to be engaging with us all the time. So having something during school, there's two things that go in my mind. One is like, then you know that they have to make time for school, so they would probably be able to come. But then are we kind of like sacrificing part of their education so that they can come? So there are like two things, I think, good things and bad things about that. Yeah.
So I think, we can do some work.
Can I jump in first?
Yeah.
Can I jump in as well? Because I think I have a relevant point, which is I just want to encourage the committee, like we definitely want community and student input, and having a follow-up conversation that's student focused sounds like a really good next step. But I want to be realistic about, one, the workload. Like, if you hear Emily talk about the work of organizing, one meeting, it's for her. It's intense on the staff. We're trying to reopen, we're trying to add more in-person time for schools, plan the next school year, get the budget done. There's just, I'm cognizant of how much we're tackling. And so I want to be realistic about balancing seeking input and getting our work done. And the policy committee has a really ambitious agenda, and we got to move through we can't afford to slow down the pace of the work, because the policies are core to our equity work. So I just want to encourage the committee to seek up, to move forward expeditiously, seeking community input, but also embracing the role of that we have. Like, we are the policymakers. That's what we are elected to do. So that's my thoughts on kind of grappling with our work ahead.
Yeah. Aura, why don't you offer your thought, and then maybe I can propose the next steps so we can.
Sure. Well, that was helpful to hear Emily F's statement, because I just had in my mind, like, the work to get people in I hear that. I also feel like if we say that these voices are really important, and I believe they are, and it is, Emily Chung's talking about students working and, all these other responsibilities and just getting in touch with people. I feel like, I wonder, does the foundation have ability for us to give stipends to students, and say, like, this is a job we're asking people to do for this amount of time, and to say, like, this is something we really value, to hear your voices. So I'm just throwing that out there.
So yeah, I want to kind of pull off of this table, like problem solving, how we'll figure out kind of getting some youth voice, but I think just the commitment, and appreciate it, Chair Figdor. That's, I'm just going to continue to refer to you as Chair to distinguish. Yes, the workload thing, that's definitely coming up about how much to manage. But I do think, in moving this forward, to move it forward effectively and have it land, we need the student perspective. And that's a potential idea, or, I think ways we've leveraged, adult allies in the building to help coordinate, right? From the advisors of the BSUs to student government leaders and things like that. So we have some infrastructure to try and leverage, right, to make this happen. So I feel comfortable committing to like something around that initially, to be able to have a similar kind of conversation so that we at least have that perspective to move forward. So that's one thought. And then I think what I'm thinking, or I guess proposing to try and be explicit about it, is that everybody reads through the pieces, kind of tries to discern some of those through lines that I think may be there, so that then next time we start to actually look at, we'll go through and say, in this policy, what do we think, given what we read, what do we think this means for this policy, and have just some discussion. We're not doing the fine-tooth combing language, but then that sets us up to, in between those next meetings, to do some of the revisions, so that at the late April meeting, we're potentially in a place to look at drafts of language to policies. Does that make sense, what I'm proposing? So next time there wouldn't be like a redlined version we're looking at, but we're just looking at the existing language based on what we saw from the dialogue, kind of landing on, we think this is what it means for a revision to this policy. And then we'll try and execute a draft of the revision between the March and April meetings for us to start looking at. And there would be opportunity, we can continue to plot out the ongoing, like pushing out the policies to the group that engaged and things like that. There are other steps we can chart from there, but just from where we are today to our March meeting, we would get some student input, review all of the feedback, and have a conversation about most of the policies, see how many we could get through to say, we think these are the revisions based on that dialogue that we would want to apply. Because I don't feel comfortable right now just going off and revising them. I'd want to have that conversation with this group first and get that direction before we affect some changes to them.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion as a starting point. Again, without any draft or without any suggestions, just to start the discussion from how do we reflect on the input of the discussions, and then start the then bring out the red pen. I think that's a really good suggestion. And then if we follow a similar process of getting input that we did for the discipline policy, where we sent Jake doing the PPS tour of input Zoom meetings, we'll get enough red ink in there to come up with something productive.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So I'll send out this feedback to that whole group, clarify that these are our next steps, the student engagement, and that we'll be, kind of talking about substantive revisions on this at the next one, and, kind of leave it at that and continue to invite people to participate in that way. I think that does leave, the need, or, potentially an unmet need, just to acknowledge of ongoing spaces for further dialogue. But I think without a specific recommendation, I don't want to over promise or over commit. We can offer up that we've heard reflections about how to use this structure as we move forward for different issues and kind of name it as such. But Emily, Chair Figdor.
Just to clarify, so you, as part of that communication, you'll invite people to our next policy committee meeting?
Yes.
That seems excellent. Thank you.
Okay. So let's pivot to the discipline policies, and just maybe I'll set it up and just kind of briefly to speak a little bit, or to just, kind of draw some through lines. And I think, how, because we have done some engagement around the discipline policies, and it will be good to, continue to think about the student work on this, but at least with the teacher and, admin. So we've been doing stuff internally with admin, and we, through the construct of what's the Living Contract Committee, which is a structure we work with PEA on. We've been bringing these policies forward for them to review, folks on that committee to review. So, that's a structure, not saying that's the end all be all, but that's been some space to bring folks along and get some, teacher and staff input on these policies. So in addition to the Family Partnership Advisory Group, right, and those other, structures with admin, we've also been now bringing forward, we brought the harassment policy, the discipline policies most recently, and have kind of teed up engagement around the law enforcement work through the LCC. So that's just one venue. But Jake, do you want to take a sense?
So can I ask a quick question, Aaron, about that? I'm sorry, what did you call the groups of staff that were?
It's called the Living Contract Committee.
Living Contract Committee. So is that also more high school focused, or is it really kind of the breadth of staff?
That has representation across.
Yeah.
Okay. It has representation.
Great. Okay, thanks.
So we have teed up to look at the suspension policy and then the weapons and school safety policies for tonight. So we have kind of these two, and then this would position us again. We just kind of we're not going to take any action on these like last time, but review them, kind of finalize language. Next time we have two last discipline policies, at which point, we'd review those at the next meeting and then be in a position of having the suite of policies to take action on at the end of March, to then move to the full board for review in April. So that's just, a reminder about the trajectory we're on. So tonight, hoping to kind of polish up JKD, suspension, and then JICIA, the weapons, school safety, and violence policies. So Jake, let me see, do you want to do the routine we've been doing of some screen share? So should be all set.
Okay, thanks. First, I just want to recognize the kind of crushing sacrifice of personal time that everybody in this room makes to care for the children and families of our community. It's remarkable and probably underappreciated, but I wanted to recognize that. I'm bringing 2 second reads to you today, like Aaron said, suspension and weapons. There is some markup on these. The markup reflects things that are kind of holdovers that I think are a little bit unresolved from first read, or edits since you've last seen it. And those I think come mainly from district and building admin and the Living Contract Committee. So you have access to them, but I will just screen share them, and we'll start with JKD. Thumbs up if you can see that. Okay, great. Okay. Does the font size need to be bigger? Nope. Okay. So I'll do a kind of a slow scroll and let people kind of read through it before we talk. So, as I said last time, there's no editorial or authorial ego on the line here. These things have been shaped by a lot of perspectives. So, any comments are fair game. Having trouble seeing the chat at the same time here. There it is.
I can't see well, I guess I can open up the participants window. I guess just to be clear, this applies to K through 12 students.
Correct.
So there was last year at the state legislature, at the education committee, there was a proposed bill that did not get support, even from Democrats, that was proposing eliminating suspensions for any K through 5th grade school. For any students between pre-K through 5th grade. And having a really narrow description of within that age and grade level of what would amount to a suspension. So I saw that as obviously a fair place to make a commitment. And especially in how we have reflected the changes in our discipline policy, our discipline philosophy. So this again, what we're reading here applies to all of our students from pre-K through 12, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I'll offer just briefly, and can look up and share the data if it's helpful, that we had virtually no elementary suspensions. So it's not zero. There have been a very small number, but I think it's like, I believe, in the neighborhood of 4 to 5.
Yeah. And all the more to me, I remember seeing the numbers, and I've frequently asked for updated discipline numbers, and so which is why I offer that as a starting point. Understanding that it really would not be a big ask in a change of practice, because we don't come across those very often. If anything, it would make us think even more, be more skeptical about what options we use for discipline. And so really identify those as true exceptions to what should be our policy. So having it in policy, something that already reflects our practices, I think would be a strong message. And I would ask administrators from their perspective as well.
Right. Chair Figdor.
I definitely support that Roberto suggestion. I also, what I noticed was that there's nothing that's really this policy is not that clear to me. I think it would be stronger if we said that in school or out of school suspension or that suspensions are absolutely a last step, an action that's a really last resort, and have some examples perhaps of when it is appropriate. But I also wonder if we could put something affirmative in the policy that requires some kind of process by which the principal is confirming that racial bias was not part of the decision to suspend a student. I'm not sure I have a clear sense of how to do that, but I just want to bring up that concept of like some thoughtful process that a principal would have to go to check their biases.
Aura?
Sorry. Just to tag on to what Emily said, I did feel like the policy felt clear to me that it's a stopgap, so that it should be kind of a last resort. But I agree that I don't feel clear what would, I mean, I get the safety piece, but I feel like there's not enough specificity about what would entail getting to the point of a suspension. So that feels to me like, whether it's examples like Emily said, or just some really clear criteria, I feel like is missing. And also I was thinking similarly, and as Emily was talking, I was figuring out my thinking about it, about process, like what's the process? I wasn't thinking the bias as a piece of it, yes, but I was thinking even just as wanting to know, is this something that a principal solely makes that decision, or is there some process that is followed to make that decision? I guess that feels like is not clear to me. So maybe there isn't a clear process, but I would like to know if there is, are they consulting, or is there some steps that have to be made to make that decision? And then I just had a quick question about the 10 days. And I saw, Jake, you had the note about there was interest for making this a cumulative figure for the year. So is this new that this 10-day piece was in there, or I'm just curious what the 10-day was in the past? Oh, okay. So that, like by state or something, or?
Yeah, state law, yeah.
Okay. So that piece, that if it's longer than 10 days, it can only be imposed by the board? Is that
right?
The part that's, okay, thank you.
And just point of information, when we talked to Drummond Woodson, they said that we could impose a different limit if we wanted, as long as it complied with statute.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I guess, what was my question about the days then? Okay, so that's not new because that's statute, right? So we have to follow that. But I mean, I guess I'm curious, was there anything different in Portland's policy? I mean, I'm guessing that's pretty rare that there were 10. I just don't know. Like, I don't know the numbers of how frequently, and do we have data about that?
I'm thinking I'll respond to a couple of things with this.
Okay.
Comments out. Jeff, do you want to your thoughts?
Just a couple issues based on what Chair Figdor had mentioned about an equity checklist before suspensions occur. I would think that we've hired educated enough and adequate and capable enough administrators such that by the time we get to a point where we have suspension, I don't know that a checklist to check their bias is something that should be considered. I think I don't know. I have some things to learn, but to me, having them check off a checklist saying that based on my decision it wasn't based on race is I don't know. I have some questions with that. And to the second point, I had a second point, but I think I've since forgot it. I'll come back if it comes up again.
I guess just on that point, and to kind of speak to a couple of these, one, I want to think about this policy in the context of the other policies that we've put forward, like the student discipline policy, JK, and the student code of conduct, which, I think we very intentionally put in some new language and expectation about how we look at the data and disaggregate it and monitor what's happening in terms of the use of, these structures in terms of suspension and so forth. So I just want to remind in that regard, because I think that's a vehicle for us to monitor how we are doing in terms of diminishing and eliminating any disproportionality in our outcomes. And so I feel like, in some respects, we don't need to have everything in every policy, I guess is a little bit what's coming up for me, that was the intent of that there, because I do struggle a little bit to feel like meaningfully in the moment, how, what a bias check might look like in an individual instance of a suspension. So I feel like that could be challenging in or it's not coming to me immediately, like what that would look like. And just recognizing we have some structures in place in the other policies to be able to continue to monitor those issues that weren't there previously. I think one other one, I guess, just, on the pre-K to 5 issue, I guess the question is, and I think this was similar to the dialogue we had about the 10 days. So I'm going to wonder the November conversation we had about the 10 days, but if, that addition of the pre-K 5 thing is, is a solution to a problem we don't have at the moment, right? So would we want to, go so far, given what our data says about that, to eliminate that completely as an option for us to kind of manage? I mean, obviously, again, with the structures to be able to monitor this over time, that complements this policy. So that's a wondering I was having there. And I don't remember, I think that just resonates on the 10-day piece, because I thought we had a similar conversation about the 10 days when this came up in November, and we had thought about scaling it back, but then my recollection to some degree, but please check me on this, is that we stepped back from that. But I thought there was at one point consideration of language that, like, it was 5 days and that suspensions beyond 5 days needed some level of, kind of authorization, that had to be approved. I don't know that's the language we need to use, but, to, kind of the superintendent's office, because it is, or just to your question, suspensions under 10 days are within the purview and authority and explicitly are part of principal job. Just, that's an expectation that they do this to manage. And again, building systems to manage and oversee that. Right. That people suspend folks often, it has to happen quickly. They're not looking to me for approval about those things. So, go ahead.
Laura, I see your hand raised. Is that from earlier or? Oh, all right.
Sorry. No, I just had a follow-up question.
All right.
I think Aaron you just mentioned it, but I guess I'm just curious, since I'm, I don't know about what best practices are in this area, but I wonder, Jake and Aaron, if you could speak to, making that decision. I think about, making those decisions under incredible stress in that moment, right? You're saying it's a quick, so I guess I'm just curious, is there best practice out there about any checks and balances, or, and I get Jeff's point, and like checking off a bias thing maybe isn't helpful, but I guess I would just be curious, are there methods that have been developed that are about doing it with some consultation or, some process in place so that there is, some sort of check or balance in those, which was helpful when you explained, like it can be in this moment of having to make a decision. But I guess I just don't know. I don't know if there are already developed practices on that.
So Aaron, pipe in, but I did some literature review on that for my dissertation, and there are some like scripts that come out of law enforcement training that, in theory, administrators could all be trained in, and those are kind of like self-talk scripts. Another practical, I think a checklist could become pro forma, but another possible avenue for practice would be that it's not a single person's decision, that you have some sort of structure where it's 3 people's decision together, but it has to be the way that the policy is written now, an out-of-school suspension is kind of an urgent thing. It's not a casual, deliberative thing. It's an immediate safety measure. And so if there were a structure, it would need to be sensitive to that. I also just wanted to name, because it may have gotten lost in iterations of revision, but this policy and all the policies in this suite, there's kind of a posture change, and you see it in the first paragraph here compared to how the preamble used to be. A lot of these policies come straight from statute, and they could be read simply as fair notice to families that principals have the authority to discipline. If the language is something like for the usefulness of the community or something like that. And a lot of the language that is emerging in all of these revisions is it's almost a noticing of administrators. Like, this is a serious thing, and there's like some sacred deliberation and thoughtfulness that needs to go with it. Yeah, and the attorneys kind of noticed that also, that shift in posture.
Thank you. That's really helpful for me to know, just looking at this and not getting the shift in that is helpful, because I do see how that is a difference. That's a significant difference. So, and thank you. And so I don't know if it is a further conversation or not, but I see those two challenges that, that in the moment need to make a decision. But I guess I'll just personally share that I think anything that we think is a decision that can go awry and that we're having concerns with, I guess I would just always advocate for a shared decision making or something where there are some checks and balances. I guess that just to me feels like less chance for a mistake or a suspension that in retrospect to be looking at that it shouldn't have occurred. So I guess that's just my 2 cents.
I mean, one thing I'd just offer, and then Roberto, I said I want to come in, just comparatively a bit, I would say, coming from, other contexts, that our overall, I think our challenge in Portland is not the overall volume of suspensions we give. It's the disproportionality of the suspensions that are issued. So like our overall cumulative suspension rates are not ones that would jump off the page in comparison to schools I've been familiar with. And, in some cases are quite low. I think our issue is getting at the disproportionality work. And so the language around the alternatives in that case and thinking that through, I think is the most important thing we're working to solve versus just an overall climate issue and the overall over-reliance on suspension as a tool to manage school climate. I would say the data doesn't indicate that that's an issue in Portland compared to other schools.
Thank you, Aaron. So real quickly, just to I wouldn't even say to respond to that, but to add to that. I think it's also important to add to that we've acknowledged that we don't have the most reliable data when we look back. So we know, for example, of practices and as I was referring at elementary school level, we know, for example, of practices that were put in place where you would tell a kid, hey, listen, I'm going to call your mom and have you go home just so that you can cool off for the day because something happened. That's a suspension. You're trying to eliminate a problem from the school building by taking the kid out. It did not get documented as a suspension, and you and I don't have the data to prove it. But it's a practice that could very well be there, especially if you have a relationship with that parent. This is all probably for the better of that kid, but still that's educational time missed, and who knows if it's the most productive practice. So anyways, that's that on that. I wanted to, 2 things. First of all, I agree that the sensitivity of these decisions and the cuteness of how they're made makes it difficult to have like either a checklist or something of that sort. However, again, referencing what's happening at the state level, we're talking about having a racial impact assessment to our policies. So I think maybe we do a check of, what is as we do when we look at inequities, what is the racial impact of our policy? And that's how we change, our practices. So it might be too much to ask that we micromanage these decisions, but certainly when we look at the big picture, again, when we measure the outcomes and we see them come out, then we can say that we're moving forward. So as a board, as Aaron said earlier, maybe it's not our role to try to figure out the minutiae of this, but certainly to figure out how do we measure and how do we hold ourselves accountable. And the outcomes are usually going to be the easiest way to do that from us as a board level perspective.
No, we did build that into the umbrella policy, so that doesn't need to be specific to each of the individual policies under it, I think.
I was going to offer something that we do have, and I guess a question, or just a question I'm thinking of is whether the language about, just to the example you were naming, Roberto, we've issued internal guidance about what constitutes suspension and thus what needs to be documented in Infinite Campus. And I wonder if there's value in including that here, some definitional language about what constitutes a suspension, because I think that you're right. Historically, that's a major issue of like under the radar suspensions that weren't codified as suspensions. And I think we've made progress on clarifying that in the past couple of years, because you're right. We really only have 2 years of data about suspensions. So I could see that as a valuable add here, potentially to codify that moving forward.
And then the last thing that I wanted to say, when I mentioned the propose eliminating suspensions from pre-K through 5th grade, like I say, I acknowledge that that's not something that happens often in our district. But I'm also thinking about we are as a district. I can how many times have we been lately in Zoom calls with peers from across the district? I was just at the USM partnership meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we had from Lewiston to South Portland to elsewhere representation from superintendents. So we're definitely interacting with the rest of the state, and our sexual harassment and discrimination policy is a model policy that now has been shared with educational leaders over at USM, and people are talking about that. So when we create these policies, and there was a earlier push at the state legislature to create a statewide bill for this, we set the example, right? We become leaders in the state. We say this is how we're expecting Maine Department of Education to view discipline. And so we set the bar in a way. So as leaders, I see us taking a step forward in that sense. And again, something that reflects our practice. So we're already there. Might as well have a policy that reflects it.
More?
Is Russell better?
Oh, thanks. I just had a follow-up thought. I think, Aaron, it really made sense to me. And I don't know internally what that looks like when you said it's shared through Infinite Campus, like as far as staff digesting that or knowing that well. But I feel like in the policy, to me, like I mentioned before, just having more concrete criteria for what would be expected from our district, what would qualify for appropriate for a suspension. And then if we then have data about who gets suspended, and you can see clearly that a racial bias for, I'm just making up an example, but like for a student being loud or doing something that's disrespect, or, that's considered by that school leader suspension worthy is not, in fact, something that in the policy we've clearly said, then we can, kind of have that, that clear criteria and expectation, and then the data after. Does that make? I just feel like having those really clear expectations are important for us to have documented there.
Okay, I have a page of small handwriting of some really good ideas that.
I do want to try and put a point on a little bit here, because we're trying to move these towards like finished products, to be able to bring forward, and we're talking about a couple of shifts, in this that we hadn't considered previously, because this is our second pass at this policy. So I'm just acknowledging that. No, that, for Jeff and Laura, it's going to be your first chomp at it here. But, I guess I'll acknowledge I still still struggling a little bit with the pre-K. I hear the point. I would love to continue to be a state and national leader in everything we do. Thank you, Yusuf. I struggle a little bit with that rationale of pulling because in a sense, we would want that for middle school, the language that we have where out of school suspension should only be used when it is unavoidable as a safety measure, is, part of that first paragraph there. And that applies, at every level, that we want that to be true. So I don't know, but, I don't have a vote, but, so I'm curious if there's a recommendation here, in terms of what we do specifically with that piece. Because I hear you advocating for it, Roberto, and understand why. But I'm not quite sure at the moment what to do with that.
Irish?
Historically, Aaron, and thank you for pointing out, I have a lot to learn. I can't speak for Aura about these conversations that have been held in the past, but when we're talking about pre-K through 5, and specifically, Roberto, I think Mr. Rodriguez, you had alluded to the fact that in the past that you have asked for disciplinary records on a regular basis. Are we permitted to see these, say, over a culmination of those records over the last 2 years to get a better understanding for me about, are the suspensions in high school, are they in middle school, are they in the Breathe program, are they, just to get a bigger snapshot on how that works?
I can provide you that. Yeah. Yep. That summary data is absolutely within the purview of the board. And I can share that with the members of the committee. Emily, John, I'll share that with you as well.
Thank you.
I have a quick question about the elementary school suspension idea that Mr. Rodriguez has brought up. At the state legislature level, when they ended up deciding not to vote for that policy, do you remember at all the reasons why most people chose to?
Yeah, Emily. Thank you for asking that. Actually, it's a good thing that you asked that. The rationale was that many districts did not have the resources in place to, in lieu of suspensions, quote unquote, deal with these students. So it was, we don't know what else to do with them was the biggest roadblock. So I found that to be very, very telling. And so I want to be clear that when I say that I feel strongly about my argument, it's not that I feel strongly that it's the right argument, but just that I find myself reinforcing that this makes sense from the way that I'm looking at it. But as I said earlier, I would really value hearing from the administrators because, as we said, they're the ones that ultimately are making these decisions. So yeah, in our school district, we don't have very often these suspensions because we have other resources in place. I hope that's the reason. We have other resources in place as stopgaps that allow us to have behavioral and other situational problems addressed without the need to resort to suspensions. And many other districts across Maine, unfortunately, just don't have that, and suspensions become the quick go-to answer.
And I would say two things there, just to tie in, that has been the investments in our behavioral health continuum, right? Are explicitly kind of putting resources in a place so that when students are demonstrating patterns of behavior that indicate they have additional needs, right? That we have some structures in place. So those are, we have this continuum of in-school Breathe programming to, the most restrictive is the, kind of day, the Breathe Day treatment program. So, you know, that certainly doesn't address every kid. I mean, those are students who have an IEP that relates around behavior challenges, but just a name that's explicitly trying to get at what, you know, Roberto's naming, which is like, okay, if we have students who are having some challenges, right, we need to layer in supports to help them be successful. And so that's the intent of that's the intent of the Breathe structure. It's not the only strategy to get at that problem, but it's a major one in a place where we've invested a lot. I think, you know, and Roberto, I'm happy to go back and like get, you know, have this dialogue with elementary administrators. My hypothesis is that the general response is going to be like, you know, my job description reads, I'm responsible for making this building run and work. And if you're, you know, given the foundation of the discipline policy, right, you know, and people's alignment with the foundational discipline policy, which promotes alternatives to suspension and all of the work we kind of talked about last time, like given that foundation, you know, my hypothesis would be to, you know, that they'll want to be able to have kind of maximum control over executing on what they're charged with responsibility for. But happy to go get some of that feedback, you know, in terms of what that, you know, how people would respond to that, particularly the elementary leaders.
That'd be really helpful to get as feedback. As a kind of just general response, tell them I'll offer resources, because that's what we can do as a board is through a budget. So if we can, and I believe much like if students have what they need, they will succeed. I believe if teachers have what they need, they'll succeed as well. So if they have the resources, this is not a big ask.
Can I just clarify, Roberto? Could you just give like a couple cents reminder what it is that you're asking Aaron to find out from?
I'd like to find out how administrators feel about having a policy that strictly forbids us from using out-of-school suspensions for any student between pre-kindergarten and 5th grade. Out-of-school suspensions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll need to come back to this at next meeting then. Yep. I want to just do a quick time process check. We're already at 7:32. Want to invite kind of, and Roberto maybe can defer to you here as chair of the policy committee, whether we want to spend a few extra minutes on the weapons policy. Not sure we'll be able to get through it in a few minutes, but, or whether we are tabling that for the next meeting. You're muted.
That rarely happens. I just wanted to get a quick read from the room. I think that we're having good conversations, a good dialogue about these policies. So I don't want to rush through them. So unless there's an urgent timeline to keep, I would feel comfortable pushing it forward. But I would get a kind of read the temperature of the room.
I would maybe.
I'm the worst timekeeper, so it's always my fault.
I would invite that if we were going to do that, which there is no immediate urgent deadline for us to do it to like tonight. I might invite, if members are comfortable with this, that we extend our next meeting by half an hour, because I do feel like we're with what we discussed about the law enforcement policies and trying to wrap up these discipline policies. That if we were kind of thinking we will likely need an hour on each of those at the next meeting to kind of get through. So I think, so I would offer that something that we can plan, people can plan for, as opposed to trying to add on extra time tonight that wasn't planned for.
How do you guys feel about that?
Good to go.
I'm trying to remember when our meetings.
Yeah,
is this a usual one or is this different this month?
This one was different this month.
Okay, so I'm like, that doesn't seem right. Okay.
Because February break threw things off the board calendar, and so that bumped us, and like it was better to have this meeting after the community dialogue.
Right. So when are they usually? So I can remember. We're usually the what?
Usually the third Tuesday.
Okay.
So the next one is February 23rd.
Or March 23rd, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron, for getting me in the right month.
Oh, so we have one this month again, so it's not that far. Okay. Yeah. I'd be fine with that. I just couldn't wrap my head around when we're... Oh, so I guess my question was just like timing-wise, like when the chair was mentioning just the urgency of getting moving, like I can't recall if, is there a time frame of trying to make sure the policies are like good to go or to bring back to the board? Is that our mission, to have it at a certain time?
Well, I think both for these and for the law enforcement ones, we wanted to have moved through board adoption so that they're ready to go for the next school year.
Okay.
This is by the end of our June, ideally by the end of our June board meeting calendar. I mean, nominally there'd be some meetings in August, but it'd be great to have it done by June. So that we're preparing fully for, I think everything we're doing is in alignment with implementation around this. I don't think,
okay.
So, ideally, next meeting we could revisit these, wrap up the discipline policies. My hypothesis has been the expulsion and bullying policies didn't have that much change to them because there's a lot driven, so I was thinking, that was part of what I was thinking, is that was going to take less time and we were going to be able to focus more on law enforcement. That certainly hasn't always played out as I maybe anticipated, but so anyway, I think we could still get through in March and still be on schedule so that we bring discipline policies and workshop and so forth in April. And then we're working on law enforcement within the committee in March, April, potentially into May, and the law enforcement gets to, the law enforcement policies get to the full board in late May and in our June meetings potentially. So that gives us another few meetings to, certainly to continue through this work.
Yeah.
So I don't think deciding tonight to move these to March, our March meeting sets us back in any significant way.
Yeah. And I think I also, from Chair Figdor, I think my biggest takeaway was just, there's a lot of work, but certainly the timeline for these might not be as urgent as, for example, like we have this budget is going to be in front of us, in a couple of weeks, and that, oops, you guys went away. That budget is going to be in front of us, and that'll obviously be, the workload there changes significantly. Oh, this is your first budget, guys. This will be fun.
Yeah, there are a number of additional special meetings that come into play. So.
Yeah, it'll go well though. So let's do that. Let's move the other policies, the weapons and those policies to our next meeting, and then we'll keep this up. I also appreciate the extra time because I know that there's some of these details that just to bring Jeff and Aura, I completely appreciate you asking for the discipline data, Jeff, because so much of what I talk about is based on that data. And I said earlier that we need to have people informed, and here I am, talking about something that you guys have never seen. So huge, went over my head. Yeah, definitely. Having the time to bring everybody along so that we're all dealing with the same basic foundational information will help us have better conversations too. So let's take the time and do it right.
Yeah, and I'll get that to you all as a next step and make it as part of the board packet next time for the committee meeting.
Great. All right. So if we don't have anything else, we'll take a motion to adjourn. Ms. Rosa Better, second by Mr. Irish. All those in favor indicate. And that's unanimous. We've adjourned at 7:38 p.m. Emily, thank you for joining us today. I hope we didn't keep you up too late. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks,
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Have a good night.